So finally, I've had a chance to do the part 2 video of the Pentax DFA 70-210 lens versus the Pentax DA 55-300 PLM lens. Now, part 1, you might want to go back and watch that. That goes without saying if you haven't already, because that explains my reasonings for comparing these lenses. I use these lenses on the Pentax K3 Mark I and the latest APS-C camera from Pentax, the Pentax K3 Mark III. Now, I'm using these lenses for the type of stuff what I do, what I shoot all the time, and that is motocross photography, some enduro stuff as well. And it is harsh shooting conditions pretty much all the time. It's either dusty, wet, muddy. I mean, pretty soon we're going to have sleet and snow, and I'll be out in that type of stuff. So them are some of the main sort of factors that I'll be looking at when I'm comparing these two lenses, not just image quality, so bear that in mind. In this video, part 2, I'm going to be using the Pentax K3 with the 55-300 PLM and the Pentax K3 Mark III with the 70-210, because in part 1 I originally planned to switch these lenses over, but we got rained off and I couldn't do that. So I was at the tracks on Saturday and Sunday, and I got the all-important footage and the photos, of course, so we can do a comparison between those lenses. And at the end of this video, I will obviously give my opinion on which I think is the better lens, not just for me, but which lens might suit you in the certain style of photography that you're shooting, whether that be landscape, portrait, or action, similar to me with Pentax. Although I don't think there's too many of us out there. But yeah, stick around until the end of the video to find out which lens I prefer. So those are pretty much the typical type of shots that I get at these sort of events, at the motocross events. And again, in this video, I switched the lenses over so that I was using the K3, the Pentax K3, the Mark I, with the DA55-300 PLM, and I was using the Pentax K3 Mark III with the DFA 70-210. Now, if you want to see how those were on, roles reversal, so I was using the K3 Mark III with the 55-300 PLM and the K3 original with the 70-210 lens, then you need to watch the first video, which obviously will be linked in the description down below. So now I'm going to talk about some of the pros and some of the cons of using each of these lenses, and I'm going to start off with the DA 55-300 PLM. Some of the pros of this lens are obviously the price and the performance. So, £400 UK sterling, it's a fairly affordable lens, and for that price you're going to get something that performs across the board. Granted, it's not going to be the top of the line lens. I mean, for £400, what can you expect? But you're going to have a solid performing lens for that money, basically. So the price and performance value is like right up there, in my opinion. Next up, we have the size, the weight and the portability. Now for me, this is such a compact lens because it does actually compact down. You can press the button in on the side and it folds up like quite small. The weight, obviously it's made of plastic, so it's not a heavy lens whatsoever. And the size, well, obviously when it's extended, it does increase in size, but like I've said, you can compact this lens down for travel. It's perfect for travel, and I have took this lens on holiday a few times before. Next up, of course, we have weather sealing, and this is something that Pentax cameras and lenses obviously are known for. With this lens, the weather sealing is the WR weather sealing. So if anyone didn't know, we have WR, which is weather resistance, and then we've got AW, which is all weather sealing. The AW is the premium weather sealing from Pentax, where the WR is like just the basic, but I mean it's better than nothing basically, isn't it? That being said, this does translate over into one of the cons, but I'll not talk about that just yet. And finally, for the pros, I've got the autofocus speed. Now obviously with the PLM lens, I'm getting a little bit tired of saying it, it's just so fast to focus, and this is across the board on all of my Pentax bodies. And if anything, on the older bodies like the K5 and the K3, it transforms those cameras into really usable cameras for sports, which obviously is not something that Pentax is known for. Now on to the cons. So the cons about this lens, the number one con for me is the external zoom. This again is doubling up as a pro and a con, because although it can be compact down and it's brilliant for that type of stuff to travel with, that in itself, with it being an external zoom, when I'm out at the tracks, if I don't cover the lens up with a carrier bag or a makeshift like raincoat sort of thing, then it is prone to sucking in dust and moisture, so just be aware of that. For me, that is a con. Next, it's the build quality. Now it's not actually a bad built lens, it's fairly good, but when you compare it to the other Pentax lenses that are out there, especially like the DA star lenses and stuff like that, granted, again, we're coming back to the price point, it's only £400 for this lens, so you can't really expect too much. But it is built, it's a plastic built lens, so when you do compare it to the other Pentax stuff, which is all metal, like the top of the line stuff is metal bodied, then it does lack a little bit there, but for the price, I can put up with that. Next up, as a con, I've got image quality. I was unsure whether to put this down, because is it really a con? Again, coming back to the price, what can you expect for £400? This lens does have HD coatings, which make the images nice and sharp, but again, when you compare it to some of the top of the line stuff from Pentax, it's not on the same level. So is it a con? I think it's in the middle sort of thing, because price to image quality ratio, it's definitely on the upper side of things. So I've put that down as a con, but maybe I need to scratch that one off there, because even saying it doesn't sound right. And the final con for this lens is that it's an APS-C lens. So if you're a Pentax shooter who owns APS-C cameras and full frame cameras, then you can use this lens on the full frame K1 and K1 Mark II, but you are going to get some vignetting, which you know, you can crop in your images and stuff, so it may or may not be that much of a problem for you, but it is going to happen because it's an APS-C lens made for APS-C cameras. Now let's take a look at the Pentax DFA 70-210 and we'll go through the pros and cons for that lens. So my number one pro about the DFA 70-210 is that it is an internal zoom, and it's the opposite to the DA 55-300 PLM where that's an external zoom. Now for me, obviously I've said this throughout the video, I shoot at really harsh conditions, at motocross tracks, dust, weather, it's crazy at times, and you know, I'm always thinking when I've got an external zoom lens like the DA 55-300 PLM, am I going to suck in any moisture? Am I going to suck any dust? With this lens, I just don't have to worry about that because when I'm zooming in and out, it's all internal. So, you know, what we'll do is we'll have a look at this lens maybe 6 months down the line and inspect the inside elements to see how much dust, if any, is inside the lens. But for me personally, it's a lot better to have an internal zoom. Next up, as a pro, we've got weather sealing. Now this lens is actually based on a Tamron lens, the 70-210 lens from Tamron. So, you know, all of the optical elements and everything like that are all pretty much the same. But I do believe that the weather sealing on the Pentax variation, the DFA 70-210, is better. So, you know, it's got the typical Pentax weather sealing, which for anyone who doesn't shoot Pentax and you've never heard of Pentax or what they're well known for, this is one of the things that Pentax cameras and lenses with weather sealing capabilities are really well known for, is that they can withstand a lot of stuff. And you might have seen online some pretty crazy shenanigans going on where people are in the shower with the camera or putting the camera in snow and leaving it out all night. I wouldn't advocate for that, but you know, I've seen it happen and the camera turns back on, so I'm just saying the Pentax weather sealing is right up there. So next up is a pro for the DFA 70-210. I've got the size and the weight. Now this lens is a little bit heavier than the 55-300 PLM, but when you compare it to other lenses of similar focal lengths, like the Pentax DA Star 70-200 f2.8 lens, the size and the weight, for me, is just a no-brainer. You know, you do give up a little bit of aperture in the, you know, you're not going to get the f2.8, your f4 with this lens, but for me personally, the size and the weight, especially when I'm out at the tracks and I'm like walking about all day and I've got it in my backpack, it really does come into play. So until you've walked around the track for 6 hours with a backpack on, shooting all day in the mud and the dust and the rain or whatever, then you might not like understand the true value of size and weight, which is a plus for me with this lens. Another pro of this lens is the image quality. So the image quality of this lens is fantastic. I had a few problems when I first got it because I didn't calibrate it, but once I sorted that out and I got the camera and the lens calibrated, the K3 Mark III to the DFA 70-210 and likewise with the K3 to this lens, then it did deliver. Is it DA Star quality? I'm not so sure. I don't think it's quite up there, but from what I've seen when I've been pixel peeping, it is a little bit better than my copy of the DA 55-300 PLM. You know, that being said, we do get variations in copies of lenses, so you know there might be some of the scientific indoor tests with all the proper consistent lighting done that, you know, it shows other results. But from my two copies of these lenses, the 70-210 does look a bit more sharp, a bit more crisp and a bit punchier than the 55-300 PLM. Next up as a pro, this lens has a constant aperture. Now this might not sound like that much of a big deal, but when you're on the go all the time and, you know, zooming in and out and changing your settings and stuff like that, it's one thing less to worry about with this lens. When I'm shooting the motocross, I tend to shoot wide open pretty much all of the time. So with the 70-210, I know that it's going to be at f4 from 70 all the way up to 210, and it's not going to change. Whereas with the 55-300 PLM, it goes from f4.5 at the short end to f6.3 at the long end, so your settings do change a little bit. And, you know, for me personally, it gives a little bit of a consistent feel to the images, and the look of the images. It plays a small part in that, and yeah, it's a pro for me. And the final point I've got down as a pro for this lens is that it is a full frame lens. It is designed to work on the K1 and the K1 Mark II. So, you know, when you get an APS-C lens and you're using that on the full frame camera, you do get the vignetting like I talked about with the 55-300 PLM if you were to use it on the K1 or the K1 Mark II. Whereas if you do it the opposite way around and you use the 70-210 lens on the K3 or the K3 Mark III, it doesn't matter. You know, I'm no expert on lenses and all the intricate ins and outs of how these things are made and the sensors and, you know, how it all works together, but from the basic understanding that I do have, it doesn't really make that much of a difference. So you can use it on the K3 or on all of your APS-C bodies, Pentax bodies of course, and also on your full frame Pentax bodies without having to worry too much. So now we're on to the cons about this lens. The cons for me, the number one con, you know, you could look at it as a con or not, is the price of the 70-210. You know, it's £1,200 UK sterling. Again, have a look what that translates to into other currencies. Is it worth the money? For me, in what I'm doing with this lens as a workhorse lens, then yes, it is for me. It is worth the money because I use it to make money. But, you know, if you were to just go out and be a hobbyist, if you were a hobbyist photographer, it's quite a bit of money to ask for this lens. You know, if you look at the Tamron version, it's literally half the price. So, you know, you're getting a little bit less weather sealing in the Tamron version, so I'm led to believe. But is it worth double the money? I mean, only you can decide, and, you know, your needs will point you in the direction of whether you think the price is worth it for this lens. But for me, as I say, it is. But I'll put that down as a con. Next up on the cons for this lens is the build quality. Now, I'm not saying that this lens is badly built, because it's not. It's a well-built lens. But for the price, you know, this like goes hand in hand with the price. It's an expensive lens, in my opinion. And the build quality, it is a plastic body on the lens. It's made of plastic. So I'd have liked to seen it being metal. But again, that probably would have pushed the price up a bit further. So, you know, you don't have to baby this. You can tell it's quite a good build quality, but it would have just been nice to see it being metal, in my opinion, for the price that it is. Next up as a con, I've got the zoom range. Now, you know, again, you can take this as you will. I'll put it down as a con in this video because I'm comparing it to the 55-300 PLM. It just doesn't have as much zoom range, either on the short end or the long end. Yes, it does make up for it with the aperture, having a better aperture, the f4 constant throughout, but, you know, I found myself on the day, it was quite interesting, when I was comparing the shots, I was able to get more variety, obviously, with the 55-300 PLM than I was with the 70-210. You know, in saying that though, it will sort of, your style will sort of mould to whatever lens they're using the most, and you will just get to know what sort of focal ranges you're comfortable at. So I have put that down as a con for now, but yeah, in the future that's probably going to change. And the final con that I've got for the 70-210 is autofocus, slow and unpredictable autofocus. And before you all say, well, that's one and done, it's over, this only applies to the original K3 when using the 70-210 on that camera. You know, I calibrated that lens and camera and I was still having similar problems with the autofocus being, one, slow, or noticeably slower compared to the PLM obviously, but it was a little bit erratic. It was, when I thought I had focus locked on, it would almost do little micro jitters, micro focusing jitters, and I don't know if that's across the board. Anyone who's had similar experiences, I'd like to hear about that in the comments down below. But yeah, I was surprised a little bit by that. But again, you know, this is it's a more modern lens, a newer lens, and obviously the K3 now is getting on a little bit in age, and it could be down to the camera itself. Maybe it might have some problems, I don't know. But when I've used the DFA 70-210 on the K3 Mark III, that problem just vanishes. So the conclusion I've come up with after using these two lenses, the DA55 to 300 PLM and the DFA 70 to 210 on both the K3 and the K3 Mark III, is that they both serve a purpose for me in the stuff that I shoot most often. With that being said though, I will say that if I was to use me older Pentax cameras, the K3 and the K5, then I would definitely be using the DA55 to 300 PLM on those camera bodies. And the reason for that is because it just boosts the autofocus speed on those cameras. It really refreshes them. Whereas if I was using the DFA 70 to 210 on those cameras, like I've said is one of the cons about that lens, it just feels sluggish and it has micro jitters. However, when using the Pentax K3 Mark III, that camera is literally light years ahead of its predecessors in terms of autofocus capabilities. So any of those advantages that the PLM lens had over the DFA 70 to 210, it's not as noticeable because of the camera body that you're using it on. So if you would ask me which lens would I be using on the newest Pentax body, the K3 Mark III, it would most definitely be the DFA 70 to 210 for the stuff that I shoot, because it's got better weather sealing, internal zoom, it's a constant aperture, and you know, it ticks all of the same boxes as what the 55 to 300 PLM does, but it's just more of a workhorse lens in my opinion for the stuff that I do. Now I could see both of these lenses being very useful for other styles of photography like landscape, portrait, still life, you know, the list goes on. And I would say that anyone who's shooting full frame on the K1 or the K1 Mark II is probably best off going with the DFA 70 to 210, as that lens is obviously made for full frame cameras, so you're not going to have to worry about any vignetting and that sort of thing. As for my fellow APS-C Pentax shooters, then, you know, I'm going to say the 55 to 300 PLM is the lens that you need to go for, because it just works across the board. And if I could choose one lens, if I only had the choice of one lens, this would be it for me. It would be the 55 to 300 PLM. So, you know, there you have it. There's the two choices and my conclusion on both of these lenses. In saying that, I'd love to hear which lens you guys would choose and why. So leave a comment down below and I'll make my way through and read all of your comments and see what your opinions on these lenses are. And as always, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.